like the subject in the book, they were aware of being photographed, but maybe not each single time, because they were not looking straight into the camera and were not prepared that I pressed the shutter. Yeah. Yeah, in this work, I did it very rarely that I really wanted to make a portrait where I was really there in front of them and asking them to look there or there.
It just struck me as something that was kind of, to say that it was, I mean, I'm not saying this is directly what people were accusing it of for being exploitative, but perhaps because the subject wasn't able to confront the camera directly, it seemed to be going back to some kind of, I don't know, traditional, like bourgeois art idea that, you know, you've got this frail female muse who doesn't confront the viewer, and then the powerful male figure who does confront, and the idea that just by someone being considered to be unaware of the camera, they're then being exploited.
I mean, they were aware of the camera all the time, also because of it. I don't know if I understood your question, you know, but I try to answer it. I mean, they were aware of the camera all the time, also because it flashed all the time. Yeah, but in this work, I saw my aim really to document these things, and not to do straight portraits of them.
But Paul, what I miss a little bit in your work is the affection. What you have with these people, and that's also why I feel a bit lost when I look at your pictures, because I miss you, you know, I miss, where is your affection for these people? What is your relationship with them? Or maybe even you don't know, but there must be a kind of fascination. But it's not so clear to me what exactly, and sometimes it's really harsh to look at it, you know?
It's harsh, But I mean, for me the still lifes are also very personal. I mean, half of the books are, half of the book is, I think, still lifes.
Yes, but that's more abstract somehow then maybe. But it was there are some pictures which are really like, it's difficult to look at, you know, because you really take them on moments that are not
it's difficult to look at. I agree.
But you know, if I compare, for instance, your photos with Diana Arbus or Nan Goldin, then there you really feel that these people are related to the subject, you know, and that make it by you as a viewer, you can relate to it too, because you feel sort of, even if it's a harsh subject, that you can there's affection, you know, and I think that's, and I think you have it, but maybe you're not, maybe you're denying yourself a bit in this whole, that you're just looking at it without really, you know.
There's a reversal in the relationship between the rest of the panel, who were photographing mainly young adults, children, whereas Jill is working with, you know, two people who occupy a kind of tragic position. So, and it's difficult for most of us to empathise with that. But with
that is true. It's a difficult subject too. Yes, of course, because it's not. I mean, younger people are always have kind of beauty, or you know, kind of hope, or it's always easier to look at that than your subject, of course.
Yeah, but for me, it's not so much about my relationship with them. It's about, for me, it's about them.
But you're
I could do it. I could do it because I lived there, but I didn't want to. I wanted to make.
You didn't want
the
to
story
be
about them. No, I was involved, but I didn't want to. In focus was not my relationship with them. This was not in the focus of the work.
Okay.
But,
I understand.
I also know what you mean.
Now I understand you too.
And I'm just curious. I think the images are really beautiful and difficult to look at, but very, very beautiful images. But I am curious why you chose to
show the book to the guy, and yet you chose not to show the book to the woman.
Yeah. Maybe you're right. I finally should show it to her. Yeah.
Next week.
Not easy to kind of make that kind of omission. So, more questions, please.
As a sweeping generalization, this sort of degree of intimacy that you can achieve is a reflection of just of gender, that perhaps female of the species has a greater sympathetic and empathetic attitude, and that comes across.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
I was just asking, as a sweeping generalization, did you think this genre of photography is perhaps better dealt with in terms of intimacy by females rather than males, because they generally, as a sweeping generalization again, would be perhaps more sympathetic or empathetic?
Well, I kind of think you answered your own question.
It's difficult because, yeah.
Do you want to?
A sweeping generalization. Well, I already had the intimate relationship. I was already so involved that, if anything, I suppose I needed to kind of step back. And I think maybe I achieved it more with my first series that involved my own children, because the relationship that I had with them as the photographer was more separate, whereas with the second I just couldn't do that. So yeah, I don't know. I was too involved maybe.
Well, I know when I teach workshops a lot of times for people who want to work with kids. And it's usually there is maybe out of 20 people, there are 19 women and 1 man.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it happens over and over. I don't know what that means.
How cool is that?
Yeah, I've just got something to raise on this, the issue about, the ethics kind of thing. But I was just wondering whether it's not so much, I think the problem is about kind of human curiosity and, the desire to look at things that, Michael said that he felt uncomfortable, and I think, there is that discomfort that we feel when we see something that's reflecting something about humanity that is kind of, is kind of part of us in a way. And, that is a general problem with anything that, like, sensationalism in the media, for instance. But I guess, I'm just wondering about we obviously have to take responsibility for pictures that we take. We might take them out of curiosity, about all aspects of human nature, like, everyone has done here. But then, when we put it out into the world, that's then a whole different set of interactions come into existence, and how do we grapple with those things? But it is to me a problem, because we seem to have a fear and fascination for those things that are quite gruesome. And I guess the issue is, why, do we take those pictures, if they're in front of us? And what purpose do they have when we've taken them? And I think that's, when you think about a kind of, the social responsibility of the photographer, that's when all those ethical issues come in. I don't know if anyone's got anything to say about, that impulse that we have to kind of like observe the kind of gruesome in a way, which, in a way when we photograph things that are kind of quite difficult, I feel that's part of that. Don't know if anyone agrees or disagrees.
You want to take that? How important is it to photograph things which perhaps might be disturbing or provocative, based on a level of curiosity, wanting to know through the act of taking the picture?
Well,
Yeah, just to go to that difficult place, really.
Yes, because if you take Paul's subjects, I mean, there must be people who live like that all around the world, you know, towards the end of their lives with difficulties of various degrees.
Mm. But could somebody else have taken your photos? Or was it necessarily that you had to do it?
I think to decide if it is necessary to take a certain picture, everyone has to do this for himself to make this decision, and it's not really a decision for me. It's if I feel I want and I have to do that, then I have to do it. If I feel there is a need for me to do this, then and it makes sense for me, then I start to do it. Mm-hmm. It's a very, everybody has to make this decision for himself.
No, but yes, but I was thinking, you know, it's for me. It's not only. I mean, if you look at Diana Arbus, it's her relationship to these people, but we look at these people through her eyes, you know, and we look at those people through your eyes. It's your. I mean, it's your eyes. It's the camera is only your. So, well, what was the question? I've got lost again.
Well,
the responsibility.
on another level, I mean, a lot of the kids that I worked with photographed very difficult things, or their nightmares, and you know, like with the axe and the being, you know, and that's something that some people feel uncomfortable and with, but I think it's. At least I think for them it was a part of their lives and part of things that they imagined and.
Yeah, but I think as a photographer you take the decision yourself, and I know that what I said, that you know there were a lot of men who had problems with my photos for women after giving birth, but I was very happy that women liked the photos. You know, if everybody would have said to me, "Oh, Dijkstra, come on, what are you showing us now? You can't really do that." I mean, then I would be thinking, okay, maybe this is not a good idea, but it's first of all, it's your own fascination, and you make the decision, and you also have a reason why you want to photograph something, and you take responsibility for that as well, I think. Oh yeah,
it's also photogenic.
Yeah, yes, and also why my question was also why can you capture all these emotions in a picture, and what I just. You know, also my inspiration. I started these photographs because I was, you know, witness. I was there when a friend of mine gave birth, and then it was in a dark room, and she would just show them with the baby. And I mean, it's dark and you don't see anything, and it's so much more about emotions. And when you have this photo, you know, where you can see every detail, of course, it's a different experience than experiencing something in real. And I think also for Paul, it's different. You know, if you just visiting your neighbors or if you take photographs, and yeah, I think it's real life. You know, a picture is an image,
and presumably, if Paul's subjects really did not want to be photographed, they would have let that be known. And who knows? Maybe he really wanted the story told.
That are featured in his book.
No, so I'm saying maybe he did want to be photographed. Maybe he did want the story told. Because if he didn't...
Yeah, I'm sure he wanted to be photographed, but did he know that he's going to be in a published book, that the rest of the world is going to see it? And I just think, don't you have to have some sort of responsibility?
Yeah, he was aware about that.
What about her?
About the book and about publishing and the exhibition thing.
What about her?
I showed her not all of the story. Yeah, I didn't do that. I felt, you know, I didn't want to.
So
I know it's difficult to explain, but it didn't feel good.
It's okay for the rest of the world to see it, but it's not okay for her to see it.
I think it's very good. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's what I thought. I mean, maybe I thought it could harm her. I know it's difficult.
I don't understand if it harms her. Doesn't it harm her now even more, even if she doesn't know these pictures exist? I just wonder.
I don't think it harms her. I think maybe it offends your moral sensibility.
I just think if something is out there that she doesn't know about, and she might come across.
But how much CCTV footage is shot of us each day as we move through the city? Okay, it's not reproduced
slightly different, isn't it?
Publicly, but another example would be Boris Mikhailov's case history, where there was this agreement with the bombs, with the street people of Kharkov, that their pictures would be used in a magazine feature to kind of raise awareness of what was happening in that city as the kind of Western economy began to change the kind of old socialist ideal. But those pictures then went on to be 5 foot by 4 foot colour prints in major international exhibitions. It became a book, and I suppose maybe it's less of a problem because he implicates himself in the picture making process, and the nature of the transaction is based on kind of mocking or parodying kind of capitalism. But there's still the same issue which you're raising there. It's just that he seems to have a strategy which might offset.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much responsibility you have to have or have to think about when publishing the work.
Sure.
And what your intentions are with what you're publishing.
But I think you're happy to take responsibility, aren't you, for Richard, thank you. Yeah, I'll come back to you next. Sorry, over here. Sorry, this man's been waiting. Well, okay. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm not keeping an eye on things.
I just wanted to, a question for Wendy, if she would just speak a little bit more about her decision to hand the camera over to the subject, and was it in reaction to previous photography or these kind of issues?
Well, I first started doing it when I first started photographing, I was working in Labrador, and it was a time in this community and this reservation where there was a lot of unrest. There was a big gap between the adult generation and the young people culturally, and I noticed that for me to photograph, and I was using a 4x5 as well as a 35mm. I knew it was changing. What happened in front of me was changed by my being there, and but I had already. I brought cameras and film with me, so it was something that I had thought about previously and gotten a grant and for these cameras and film. But what I didn't imagine was how successful it would be, and how able those kids would be to photograph that turmoil that was going on. And so I soon saw that they could do it much better than I could do it.
And that was an ethical decision.
It was an ethical and a photographic decision. I mean, I don't think you can separate these things so easily.
Richard, and then Promise.
Going back to ethics again, which we seem to be talking quite a lot about, I'm just interested, Paul, in your work, how far you would have been prepared to go. At what point would you have drawn the line photographically, if you'd come in on something, or are there things we're not seeing that you decided not to photograph for various reasons, or I'm just interested in your boundaries, really.
I mean, I did not photograph him when he had this. When I found him with the stroke on lying on the bottom on the floor. But I think I did not photograph him because there was just no time to do that, because he was lying there and it was obvious that he had a heart attack or a stroke, something like that. So we had to do something very fast. So there was no time to take pictures.
But if there had been time, would you?
If there had been time, I think I would have made pictures. Yeah, I don't know if I would have used them, but yeah, I think I would have taken pictures. Take picture. Yeah, but I think I would have. I'm not sure, because and how can be time in such a situation? I mean, I tried to pull him on the chair, and I called the ambulance, and then you're waiting for the ambulance, and you try, if he's still, awake. So there can't be really time in such a situation, I think.
Hi, I have 2 questions. Paul, first of all, maybe this is an observation as much as anything else. Since I saw your book, I've seen a film, The Death of Mr. Lazarescu. I don't know if you have seen it.
Which one?
The Death of Mr. Lazarescu. It's a Romanian film about an old man who goes into the Romanian hospital system. That's a shame. Anyway, it reminded me when I saw the pictures again that the film is very suggestive of your book, and I was going to ask you a question about a film you haven't seen, so I won't bother. So my second question is, I noticed that Paul and Toril, you say that your photographs are to idealize the situation, and Paul, you say that your pictures are realistic but harsh. And I wondered if the two of you would say why you want to idealize the situation and you want to tell the harsh truth.
Well, I got wrapped up in the idyllic based around the ideas from the family albums and the snapshots, and that's really quite as simple as it was. I also felt that there was a lot of idyllic stuff, can I say, going on. There was a lot of good things, and I kind of wanted to just focus on those good things. I think there are some of the photographs that I got that could indicate that there were things that were not all that great, but you really have to know what you're looking for to see it. The fact that there were disagreements between the girls, and sometimes you could catch it in the way one of them is looking at the other. And there was one of my subjects was quite reluctant at being photographed, and in the end I photographed her reluctance. And in a way you could say that I was sort of pushing my limits the same way as Paul. I think once you sort of get started on anything that you really want to do like this, I think you just get so driven that that's what you want to do all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, I think that it happens to all the photographers I ever meet. Talk about this drive. You just got to keep doing it. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think even though your pictures are like that your idea also was about family pictures, and you're taking pictures of birthday parties and of going on a trip with them to the countryside, but you still can see in the pictures that especially the teenagers, that they are in time of transition, that they desperately try to find their own identity through clothes and through hairstyle, and that they you can see that they are working on themselves a lot, things like that. So you can see that they are not perfect, and it's not so idealized for them. And in my photographs, in these photographs that I showed here, yeah, as I said before, the reason to not idealize it was that would be really a moral problem for me, to idealize their situation.
Yeah, but it's true that your subject has already that optimistic and hope, and you know what young people have, and that subject is totally the opposite. I mean, it's people on the end of on the edge of life and on the end of their lives, and sort of going down.
Looking at your work today, all of it together, it struck me as it's a range of humanistic work, and all very sympathetic or empathetic in some ways. But I think somehow it always comes up with the medium of photography and then the nature of portraiture, because I think we can all kind of, all your work is portraits, is portraiture in different ways, or can be qualified as portraiture and other things, let's say. But I guess the nature of photography and portraiture raises the issue of witnessing and interaction, and you've all obviously negotiated your interactions with your subjects and reconciled that. You've all figured that out in some ways, but obviously the audience always, not just this audience, but I think in general with photography and portraiture, the audience always wants to know how these things were achieved, and I think you've all done them differently, and that's great for people to see and students to see, but why is it that the nature of, or the question of trespassing always comes up? And I think you've probably all encountered it, I mean, it's the question of like who owns the image, and or have you gotten permissions and things like this, or ethics, etc. And how do you, and this is a general question for any of the panelists, but what do you think about this question of trespassing, and why the audience always has a struggle with it, or a lot of people do? Why do you think that is?
Is this a question? I can't hardly hear it with my bad English.
We couldn't see where you were.
It's there, she's there. Madeline.
Oh, right, sorry. I
was like,
well, I have a very short answer. I think that we have to be a little bit careful that we don't go too far in always being so terribly worried, because if we're not careful, we're going to end up without any photographs of any people at all, because we're just going to be so terribly worried about whether we use them. Of course we use them. Well, it's a bit of a mystery to me.
Well, I don't think that was always the case. I mean, certainly, Walker Evans, photographed
Lewis Carroll.
Yeah, with angled lenses, everything. No one had a problem with that. And I think it's, part of it is cultural. And, when I was working in India, everyone wanted to be in the picture, and it was very hard to, separate people out and say, no. So I think it's something that's happened in the last maybe 30 years.
Possibly, in terms of visual literacy, or I mean, there's something you said which struck me about being in an image-saturated culture and wanting to heighten difference through your practice. or awareness?
Well, you know
or
what I
awareness
find
is
sometimes
different?
very difficult, that there is such a culture in the medium that you have to look like this and you have to be like this as a girl, you know, you have to be so tiny. And I mean, it's, and also I think, you know, we have, for instance, the mini playback show or this Idols, and it is, you all have to look like this, or you have to, and I always think it's nonsense. You know, this mini playback show, for instance, in the Netherlands, was this little children can perform and do their song. And what they do, they dress them up in clothes with you know, was designed, or there were adults who were doing this to these kids, and I always thought, well, why don't they let the kids do that themselves, you know? And I always try to look for something authentic and what make people different from each other, what make people characteristic. And I really think that this time, that there's a sort of, I don't know, it's like everything has to look the same somehow. And I think there's so much beauty in other things, in, you know, and just in more authentic. It is like if the media wants to look us all at something in the same way, and I don't know.
Well, maybe it's something to do with the current status of photography and the kind of popular consciousness that it still holds a power for us, despite being ubiquitous, that it still can move us and mobilize us into thinking differently, behaving differently. So I don't think it's no bad thing. I'm mindful that it's coming up to 5 o'clock, and I think Ken Grant would like to say a few words, but I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Colin. I'll come to your question after, but I wanted to ask you, as the kind of perpetrator of the event, what you've got out of it in terms of your initial assumptions around your postgrad research. Sorry, we'll come back to you. Promise.
I think that people have been talking about the differences between Paul and Rinneke and Tara and Wendy. I mean, I think there's much more similarities between them. So I mean, what I've seen today, I've seen photography. I think both Paul and Rinneke, you're using the body in different ways to sort of show the aging. I think you're using Rinneke's, obviously you're using emotions in a very, very direct way, but yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a comfortable thing. I think it's very subtle and very skillful, and I don't think anyone else can do that. But I think there is a massive discomfort. I think if you look at something like the Hilton Head portrait of the girl who made herself up, I think it's a very, very uncomfortable picture in lots of ways. I think it's a very truthful picture.
Which one?
The Hilton Head, the girl in the apricot. But it's very, very truthful, but I think it's very, very uncomfortable in lots of ways, just because it is so truthful, and you do capture that moment when she's literally between being a child and being an adult, and she doesn't really want to be the adult that she's expected to be. That her mother expects her to be, or American society or British society, whichever society expects her to be. And I think Paul, that's looking at the body. I think, people have accused you of being exploitative. I think, I'd agree with you that it's not, your photography, it's not really an extreme. Everyone dies, everyone gets old, everyone suffers, everyone decays. And I think that's what you're photographing to a certain extent. You're photographing that, that transformation of the body, which is in a very, very different way to Rinneke, obviously. And I think, Wendy's pictures, they're massively uncomfortable, and people have huge problems with the idea of children, having ideas of death and surrounding themselves, basically having minds that aren't, it's not an age of innocence. It's not. Children aren't these, gardens of earthly delights where it's just joy and games and pleasure. There's darkness, there's death, and there's despair, and there's murder and all kinds of terrible things. And then Toril, I think, you know, your pictures of, you do have this beauty in your pictures, and, you know, it's like idyllic, but at the same time, you know, I think there's a similar thing to what Rinneke is doing, and there is this what am I trying to say? There is this sense of children being on the verge of adulthood, and it's uncomfortable. And I don't think you push. You don't go there. There are limitations, but you can sense it. And you know, in your talk, you know, you talked about the unhappiness of being a teenager. So I think there are a lot more similarities. I think the one thing that, you know, all the photographers here have in common is basically it's leaving something to chance. You know, it's leaving something open. That, you know, I think the subjects, the people that you all photograph, they do speak. So I think in a sense that's really what I get out of the day. You know, it's looking at photographers who are leaving something to chance, who are letting the subjects, you know, do the speaking for them. It's not just something that's, you know, they're creating or making. It's really engaging with the outside world and with people in a way that's not really formulaic, I think.
Thank you. As we come back before some questions, a few rows back behind.
Yes.
We'll come back. Okay, thank you. So I can't see.
Hi, can I ask one question quickly? Yes. Just up here. Just quick question to all the panelists is up in the balcony. Sorry, cheap seats. Quick question to all the panelists. If you were put in a role reversal situation, would you allow yourself to be photographed if you were what your subject is or was?
Was that to me?
To all of you.
To all of us.
Yeah. If you were to switch places, would you allow yourself to be photographed and knowing that it was going to be used in the public domain?
I'd like to think I'd say yes.
What is exactly the question?
Would you swap places?
Would
you be happy to be represented in the way that you represent other people?
Yeah, I guess so, yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I hope, I mean, I hope that I mean, I don't want to get in such a situation, you know, so,
okay.
That's it.
Well, I think it's really hard to imagine. I mean, I think it's important to be photographed as a photographer, and I like it that my students photograph me. And when we did Black Self, White Self, for example, I did it too. And it was actually great because, you know, the African American kids were bringing me clothes and dressing me up and telling me how to, you know, how to pose. And, but I think I mean, I don't know what it would be like to be asked to be a 12-year-old and to make pictures, because I wasn't.
Yeah, that's true too.
But that's part of
difficult to
the curiosity and the fascination,
yeah.
surely, is trying to get back to
that point.
Some
yeah.
childhood, you know, memory, or the childhood imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I find your work fascinating, because it's part of a process of realizing and materializing that in some way, and not idealizing it. But,
can I interject, please? Cheap
Sure.
seats. Just a question for Wendy. Really liked your work. Just in response to recent news on Jesse James, I just want to say, you know, I find it quite uplifting, the Black and White project.
We can't hear you.
No. Sorry.
Would you mind repeating the question again?
Just a question for Wendy, regards to the Black and White project. The recent news on Jesse James, been in the press lately, obviously highlights the negativity that the press still have towards minority communities in the UK, especially London, Moss Side, Toxteth. One of the questions is really, Wendy, are you going to do any work with these groups in Moss Side, possibly, Toxteth, Brixton, because your work in Margate was very good. Really, it's really just to say that with the Black and White project, the uplifting thing was the positive nature of black people's response in North Carolina to themselves. And it's very refreshing, because in this country, and I might be wrong, although of being someone from a minority, you don't get that positiveness in this country. Absolutely not. I don't know if anybody here could disagree with me with that, but you don't, because you get a stereotype that's pervade. So I just wanted to say, really, I mean, I'm not very good at this, sorry, but could you bring some of that over here? Because especially being a black person in America, seems to be much more uplifting, much more direct, much more enlightening than being a black people in this country. And people might disagree with me with that, but from a personal point of view, a lot of Americans seem to handle, especially black Americans, seem to have a very direct way of dealing with social issues and problems that our British press cannot seem to deal with in this country, can't seem to come to terms with in this country. It's very demoralizing, actually, in a sense, because you just don't get that positive feedback. So I'm sorry to make this kind of long-winded, but I just wanted to sort of get it off my chest.
Well,
can you wait a second?
Yeah, just let me respond. I know what you're talking about. I did a workshop based on this project that people could sign up to do, so that they could carry it out, because I was in the process of writing a curriculum around it. And there were people who came from South Africa and Britain, and it was a disaster. And it was mostly, it was a combination of and I was doing it with an African-American writer, Rebecca Walker, Alice Walker's daughter. And it was very difficult, mostly for the people from Britain, to talk about the subject. But also it was difficult for the woman from South Africa and other white people, other American white people. And I think, I'm sorry it didn't work out better, but I really saw that there was a definite problem among some people to talk about it, and it was the white people.
Can I just make a point? I'm a black American, and you have to be very cautious about the way that you kind of use your language and take in consideration the role that media plays. Because I mean, I've lived over here for about 6 months now, and I understand that there is an incredibly negative view of people of color in general over here to a certain extent. But it exists in the States as well. It's not like you're... Pardon? Well, I just think you do have to be careful of your language, and you have to kind of also understand that, I mean, it exists everywhere. No, and I understand, I mean, I'm a big fan of Wendy's work, and I do understand there is a certain amount of optimism that comes from the amount of honesty that comes throughout that work. And I think you'd probably find that, I mean,
Well, maybe this is something we can continue to talk about afterwards.
Sorry, one question down here.
Right, there you go. Right.
You're
Sorry.
right. Well, two questions actually. First, Wendy, how did you make first contact with the asylum seekers you photographed?
Well, I actually didn't do it myself. I worked with Art Angel and Creative Partnerships, and they made contact with the people from Migrant Helpline and the Kent County Council that facilitated the meetings.
Okay.
It was a long process.
All right. And secondly, Tori, were there any times where, any situations you got into where you couldn't stay an observer, where you had to interject and do something? Was there, I don't know, someone really, really drunk that needed an ambulance or needed some sort of adult supervision that you thought you had to step in?
Well, I was working in controlled situations, and the difficulty was that there was some anger against me for working in the situations, but from people in Margate. And when I was working with the unaccompanied minors, it was actually quite a tense situation because the National Front was very active around, and we had to carry personal alarms, and there were some attacks, but not with the kids. Were lovely.
Okay.
Right.
Want me to answer that too?
Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I can do. I can tell you, I did have one moment when I was thinking, oh, this is just terrible. There was one guy who came to visit from another neighboring town, and I was watching him in the center of Abergavenny drinking what seemed to me an enormous amount of neat alcohol very, very fast. And he must have gotten very, very hot very quickly, and he started taking his clothes off. And he was taking, I can't remember if he left anything on at all, but it would have been a very dodgy moment if I'd been left with him. But what happened was that as this group of teenagers, you can never quite understand how or why they move, but somehow there is some consensus that they move on. And I could feel this decision sort of starting to happen, and I was thinking, oh, I am going to get left now with this, totally nearly naked young teenage boy, totally drunk, and I didn't even know who his parents were, so I couldn't contact them. But, they picked up his clothes, they picked him up, and they got him moving with them, and somebody somehow managed to contact his parents, and he got home. So I felt, I was quite impressed, really, because you assume that they wouldn't do this, but they did. Okay.
I think we can all identify with that.
Yeah, we all want friends like that.
And over to Ken Grant to close the day.
On that note.
Right there,
Can
Okay, you sit down. Okay, well I'm going to be very brief because the shuffle has already begun. I can feel it starting to shuffle towards the door, but really there's a lot of people who've put this together and I'm not one of them, so I've really enjoyed the process of today and actually listening to people being incredibly clear about their ideas, their work and their opinions, and that's the panel, but it's also the people who've managed to come through very heavy traffic from a great distances, so I thank you all for that. But before I finish, I'd just like to, I'll get shot if I don't, so I just want to mention a few people or a few organisations that have actually helped make this day possible. Those being Photogari, the University up in Cullean, particularly the marketing people, but also the people who've helped with the behind the scenes recording, filming, sound, etc. Also the people who publicised the event, like the BJP magazine and the Portfolio magazine, Gloria Chalmers, and Goma magazine, but then Chris Kokin, Kent Institute, and Paul Herman at Red Eye. Staff at the Riverfront, everything that's come back to me over the last few weeks has been exceptional in terms of their support and if I remember, the first one we did was with a very, very small screen and just trying to make something happen very, very quickly. It's been a very impressive move on from that, and I think it's testimony to the support from the organisation itself. So thanks very much to the Riverfront people. But then I said I had very little to do with it, and that's because the strength of the MA students is actually a great credit to themselves and to us as well. I'm thinking particularly people like Jenny Hardy, Sarah Goody, Tig and Juan Torino, who didn't expect to be carrying the mic around all day, but thank you for doing so. Matt Hammond, of course, and Jill Jennings, who all contributed and got this thing to happen and got people from a number of different continents together to talk about ideas. And I think that's exceptional and incredibly refreshing for me. But finally, I suppose I'd just like to thank the panel for being incredibly forthright and, no matter what, incredibly open about their practice. That makes a big difference to me. Thank you. Then get to you.